I'm Evelyn Carter, 67 years old, and for most of my life I believed my family's love was the kind that could weather anything. That illusion ended on a warm July evening, standing on the old dock at Clearwater Lake. The sun was sinking low, brushing gold across the ripples, and I was thinking about how Cliff, my late husband, used to love this hour. I didn't hear Ryan come up behind me. My grandson's footsteps were quick, deliberate, not the careless shuffle of a teenager wandering over. "Let's see if you can still swim, Grandma," he said, his voice sharp, almost amused. Before I could turn, two cold palms pressed hard against my back. The world tipped, the dock slipped from under my feet, and I hit the water in a blind shock. It was colder than I remembered. My chest seized, my legs refused to kick. The taste of the lake filled my mouth before I could take a proper breath. Somewhere above me, laughter rang out, deep, unguarded laughter that carried across the water. I forced my head above the surface just long enough to see Ryan grinning, his phone in his hand, and my son Mark standing beside him, arms folded like he was watching a stranger. On the patio, Samantha swirled wine in her glass, barely glancing over. "She's being dramatic," she said to someone I couldn't see. The dock seemed miles away, but I clawed toward it anyway, each stroke slower than the last. My shoulder throbbed where the old surgery scar pulled tight. No one came to help. No one called out my name. When I finally grabbed the edge, splinters bit into my fingers as I hauled myself up. I stood there, dripping knees-scraped clothes, clinging, their laughter still echoing. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just walked past them, the wet hem of my cardigan slapping against my legs, and sat at the picnic table. That was the moment I stopped wondering how much I meant to them. The answer was floating there in the water I had just climbed out of. And as I stared at Ryan's face, so unfamiliar now, I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something they'd never see coming. I didn't go inside right away. The sound of their voices carried across the yard, Mark talking about grilling times, Samantha laughing at something one of the guests said, Ryan's deeper chuckle laced with the kind of pride only cruelty could feed. I sat there, water dripping onto the old picnic bench Cliff had built decades ago, and let my eyes wander to the lake. It looked calm again, as if it hadn't just tried to take me. Or maybe it was them who tried using the lake as their hands. The memory of Ryan as a boy kept tugging at me, the little boy who would crawl into my lap with a blanket and whisper, "Don't tell Mom, but your pancakes are better than hers." The boy who once cried when I scraped my knee gardening. Back then, his love felt easy and pure. Now that boy was gone, replaced by someone who looked like him, but had none of his softness. I thought about when the change started. 16, maybe. That's when the phone was always in his hand. When "thank you" became a grunt and he started looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that took up too much space. I told myself it was normal teenagers pull away, they grow independent. But that wasn't independence. It was training. He was learning how to treat me from the people raising him. The air felt heavier the longer I stayed outside. I could hear the scrape of chairs, smell the char of burgers. No one came to check on me. I finally stood the cardigan clinging cold to my back and stepped into the house. In the kitchen, Ryan stood barefoot, scrolling through his phone, little puddles forming on the tile from his damp swim trunks. Mark leaned against the counter with the lemonade I'd made that morning. Samantha was showing a slideshow of beach resorts to one of Ryan's friends, her voice light, her smile tight. No one looked at me. No one offered a towel or asked if I was all right. I slipped quietly into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My heart was still pounding, but it wasn't from the water anymore. It was from the realization that this disregard had been building for years. I stayed in that room longer than I meant to, staring at the framed photo on my nightstand. Ryan was 6 in that picture, gap-toothed, holding the guitar I'd bought him for his birthday. His eyes had been bright, then his fingers clumsy on the strings, but he played until his little hands ached. I'd sat beside him on the living room floor that whole afternoon thinking how rare it was to see a child so lost in joy. Where had that boy gone? I could trace it back if I tried. After Mark lost his job again, Ryan ended up here with me for months at a time. I was the one who made sure his homework got done, who sat up with him through his asthma attacks, who scraped together enough to pay for his school trip when his parents just couldn't swing it this year. I never once thought of it as charity. It was family. But somewhere between childhood and manhood, Ryan's gratitude curdled into expectation. He stopped saying please or thank you. He started mocking the way I stirred my tea or told a story. At first, I brushed it off. Teenagers, right? They grow out of it. Only he didn't. He grew into it. And Mark and Samantha didn't stop him. They laughed at his jokes even when the punchline was me. They rolled their eyes when I asked for help with something heavy. They made their disdain feel normal, like it was part of the family language. The truth was, I had been drowning long before the lake. That shove was just the first time it happened where everyone could see. I reached for the journal in my nightstand drawer. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. They will never get the chance to drown me again. I closed the book and slid it back into the drawer. My hands were steady now. From the other side of the door came the clink of wine glasses and the low hum of conversation. They were moving on with the evening as if nothing had happened. And maybe for them, nothing had. But for me, something had shifted, and there was no shifting back. The next morning, sunlight was spilling across the kitchen floor when I heard a knock at the side door, the only door she ever used. Marilyn Brooks never bothered with the front. "Open up, Evie." I brought muffins and opinions, she called, her voice cutting through the quiet. I smiled in spite of myself. She stood there in oversized sunglasses and a windbreaker the color of spring grass, a paper bag in one hand, 2 coffee cups in the other. Without waiting for an invitation, she swept in like she owned the place. "You look like hell," she said, setting the cups on the table. "Sit, I'll pour." I sat because that's what you did with Marilyn. She commanded the room, even my kitchen. She tore open the bag, slid a blueberry muffin toward me, then narrowed her eyes. They did something, didn't they? Just a nod from me, but that was all she needed. She didn't gasp or fuss. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Then it's time. Time for what I asked." She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp white folder. "Thomas Ellsworth, best estate attorney in Burlington. I've used him twice. You remember last year when we did your taxes? You told me every account you had." I blinked at her. "You kept that. I keep everything," she said, sipping her coffee. "Especially when my best friend's handing out her love and her legacy to people who'd push her into a lake." I stared at the folder. It felt heavier than paper should. "It feels final," I murmured. "Final is when they carry you out and pretend they cared," Marilyn said, leaning back in her chair. "This is called taking control." I looked out the window toward the garden cliff and I had planted together. The hydrangeas were blooming stubbornly against the fence, as if refusing to give in to the summer heat. I felt a kinship with them in that moment, still here, still standing. Marilyn reached over and patted my hand. "We're going into town. You need a decent breakfast and a lawyer who won't waste your time. Let's go show them you're still yours." By the time we reached the cafe downtown, the breakfast rush was thinning. Marilyn picked a table by the window, ordered for both of us without asking, and stirred sugar into her espresso like she was mixing a potion. "You're going to need backbone and caffeine," she said, sliding my cup across the table. She wasn't wrong. After we ate, we walked the 2 blocks to Thomas Ellsworth's office, tucked between a bookstore and a bank. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Thomas stood to greet us, a tall man in his early 60s, with the kind of handshake that made you feel like your problems had just been halved. "Bring everything you've got," he said after we sat. I laid the folder on his desk, the original trust documents Cliff and I had put together after his stroke bank statements, and the letter confirming Ryan's university fund. "I started putting this aside when he was 10, I told him. Birthday money, small bonuses, tax returns, even skipped a vacation one year. Cliff and I agreed education first. Thomas flipped through the pages. 60,000. Untouched. Until now, I said quietly, he's at the community college. Plans to transfer next year. That was always the plan until he decided I didn't belong on a dock or in his life. Thomas didn't ask for details. He just nodded, professional but not cold. What do you want to do? Redirect the funds. Close it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the bookshelf behind him. Nothing. Not yet. I want to watch. I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm slipping. I want to know who still shows up and who's just waiting for the will. Marilyn smiled faintly. We're not burning bridges today, Thomas. We're just checking which ones were never real. He closed the file and slid it back toward me. Fair enough. When we stepped back into the sun, the day felt different. The money wasn't a gift anymore. It was a mirror, and I was finally ready to see what it would show me. I started small, a stumble on the porch steps one afternoon, a pause mid-sentence as if I'd lost my train of thought. When I poured tea, I let the cup rattle lightly against the saucer. Nothing dramatic, just enough for them to notice, or so I thought. The reaction came faster than I expected. Not concern, not kindness, annoyance. Ryan stopped greeting me when he walked through the door. Instead of a, "Hey, Grandma," it was a grunt, if anything at all. If I asked him to carry in groceries, he'd sigh loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Mark whispered to Samantha in the kitchen late at night, thinking I was asleep. "She's getting worse," I heard him say once. "I can't keep cleaning up after her." Samantha's voice was sharper. She left the stove on again. "That's dangerous. What if Ryan's here alone? I never left the stove on." I checked it twice before bed, but I didn't argue. Let them build their case for my decline. Let them think I was slipping. It was strange listening to them plot in low voices like I was a chess piece they could move around. They thought they were planning their next move. They didn't realize I was playing a longer game. I began keeping a new page in my journal, 2 columns. One side notices, the other avoids. Ryan's name slid further and further into the second column. Mark and Samantha never left it. One morning I walked into the kitchen and found Ryan and Samantha whispering over coffee. The word facility floated between them like a bad smell. They froze when they saw me, and Ryan muttered, "She didn't hear that." I poured my own coffee, slow and deliberate, and looked out at the garden cliff I had built from nothing. The hydrangeas were blooming again, stubborn, just like us. "I'm old," I said, my voice even, "but I'm not deaf." Neither of them answered, and that silence told me more than their words ever could. It was Samantha's idea, a casual Saturday dinner for her yoga friends and a few of Mark's coworkers. "We'll grill, keep it simple," she'd said earlier in the week. "Maybe you can make that lemon cake they love." I didn't argue. I baked the cake that morning, the kitchen warm with the smell of sugar and citrus, but I already knew I wouldn't be staying long once the guests arrived. By sunset, the backyard was full of laughter and the scent of grilled meat. I stayed in the kitchen refilling drinks and keeping out of the way. Through the open sliding door, I could see Ryan holding court with a circle of guests. "So get this," he began, his voice loud enough to carry. "Last month at the lake, Grandma fell in, flailing around like a turtle on its back. 'Help me, help me!'" Laughter erupted around him. Real laughter, the kind that makes people slap their knees. My hands tightened around the tray I was carrying. She wasn't drowning. Ryan went on grinning. She was angling for sympathy. You know how old people are, they weaponize helplessness. Someone muttered, "That's dark," but they kept laughing. And then Samantha's voice cut through, smooth and cool. "She's a liability, not family. We need to think about the future, not sentiment." The words landed like a stone in my chest. I stood frozen just behind the sliding door, the tray trembling in my hands, not from age, but from rage. I set the tray down quietly on the counter, turned and walked to my bedroom without a word. Behind me, the laughter rolled on, spilling out into the night air. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I felt something shift. I wasn't angry in the way I had been after the dock. I wasn't even heartbroken. I was done. I reached into my nightstand and pulled out the envelope with Thomas's card inside. My fingers didn't hesitate as I picked up the phone. "It's Evelyn Carter," I said when he answered. "I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. "Come in tomorrow," he said. "Bring your documents, bring your ID." "I already have them," I replied. The next morning, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the night before had scrubbed something out of me. I dressed in a simple navy sweater, slid my documents into a leather folder, and drove into town. Thomas's office felt exactly the same as the first time, tidy, steady, no wasted words. We went through the paperwork line by line. The university fund closed. The balance, $60,000, wired directly to the Hawthorne Foundation's STEM scholarship program for first-generation college students. I marked the donation as anonymous, but I added a note in memory of Cliff. Thomas looked up when I signed the final line. "Anything else?" "Yes," I said. "The house. When the time comes, it's to be sold and the proceeds donated. I want nothing left for them to argue over." He nodded, making the necessary notes. "You understand this is permanent." "I do." My voice was steady, almost calm. By noon, I was standing in front of the train station ticket counter. "One way to Maple Grove, Maine," I told the clerk. The earliest Sunday departure. A small town Marilyn's old friend had told us about, peaceful but alive with a community garden, a shared workshop, and neighbors who still knocked before coming in. Back home, I packed lightly. 1 suitcase, 3 sweaters, my gardening gloves, Cliff's flannel shirt, my leather journal, and a single framed photo of me holding baby Ryan back when love between us was uncomplicated. That evening, I stood in the kitchen doorway while they scrolled their phones and folded laundry. "I'm heading out with Marilyn this weekend," I said. "She wants company on a little road trip." "Cool," Ryan muttered without looking up. Mark didn't answer at all. Samantha glanced at me just long enough to say drive safe before turning back to the laundry basket. Not one of them asked where I was going. Not one asked when I'd be back. I realized then that they already thought I was gone. They just didn't know how right they were. Sunday morning came quiet and gray, the kind of sky that made the air smell like rain. I woke before the alarm, dressed without turning on the light, and folded the blanket at the foot of my bed. My suitcase waited by the door, the handle already pulled up. At exactly 6, Marilyn's old blue sedan rolled into the driveway. She didn't honk, just idled with the headlights low as if this were a secret mission. I took one last look at the living room, the walls lined with photographs that no longer meant what they once did. There was no pain in leaving, only space. No one stirred as I closed the door behind me. Not Ryan, not Mark, not Samantha. We didn't talk much on the drive to the station. Marilyn just reached over once and squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing," she said. At the platform, she handed me a small envelope, just in case she added and didn't explain further. I tucked it into my bag and boarded when the train arrived. Maple Grove was exactly as promised, quiet but not lonely. The retirement community sat on the edge of a forest, the kind of place where you could hear birdsong before breakfast. My new apartment was small but bright, with a window that looked out over the shared garden. That afternoon, I set Cliff's flannel on the hook by the door and placed the photo of baby Ryan on the windowsill, not as an invitation to remember, but as a monument to what had been. Then I sat at the little desk and began to write. To Mark, Samantha, and Ryan. The words flowed without hesitation. I reminded them of every year I had been there when they couldn't be paying tuition, staying up through illnesses, making birthdays special, even when they forgot mine. I told them the fund was gone, the inheritance would follow, and my choice was not vengeance, but peace. I signed it not Mom or Grandma, but Evelyn Margaret Carter. A full name they had almost forgotten belonged to a whole person. I sealed the envelope, walked to the corner post office, and sent it first class. It took 5 days for the ripple to reach me. I was in the garden that morning, kneeling by a row of marigolds, when Thomas's number flashed on the phone I kept just for him. "They got the letter," he said, his voice carrying the faintest trace of amusement. "Breakfast table delivery, I'm told." Ryan opened it, expecting a check. He read your words out loud, and by the time he hit the line about the fund being gone, Samantha was swearing and Mark kept repeating, "We thought she'd wait." Wait for what I asked, brushing soil from my gloves. Thomas gave a short laugh. "You tell me. I could picture it without being there." Samantha pacing Mark, rubbing his temples, Ryan's bravado cracking when he realized there was no safety net. I didn't need to hear the rest. Word spread quickly in their world. By the following Sunday, Marilyn was calling with updates. "People at church are whispering," she said. "Samantha's yoga friends know you're alive and well and they're not buying her poor me act. One even asked her, 'What did you do to her?'" Mark tried to spin the story, claiming I'd lost it, that my decisions were erratic. But that didn't sit well with neighbors who remembered me paying for their kids' school fundraisers, organizing food drives, and never asking for anything in return. Ryan's friends began to drift away. Without the money for his transfer, he dropped classes. The boy who once strutted into rooms with his phone in hand now kept his head down. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The shift was already happening. The social circle they depended on was rotating without them, quietly but decisively. That night I sat on my small balcony, tea warm in my hands, the air scented with pine. The distance between us wasn't cruel, it was honest. They had wanted me quiet and compliant. Now they had it, just not in the way they expected. The weeks that followed moved at a gentler pace, the kind of rhythm I hadn't known in years. I learned the names of my neighbors. I planted tomatoes in the shared garden. I walked the forest trail behind Maple Grove every morning, the air cool and clean in my lungs. Back at the lake house, Marilyn kept me informed in small doses. Ryan had stopped leaving his room for days at a time. Mark had started drinking again, just a little at first, but enough for people to notice. Samantha's smile had grown tighter, her voice sharper, her invitations fewer. I didn't ask for updates, but Marilyn knew me well enough to share the parts that mattered, not their misery, but the truth that life was moving on without me there to carry it. One evening, Thomas called. "I met with them today," he said. "They finally believe it's over. I read them your statement, every word. Mark tried to interrupt, said you'd lost your mind. I told him, no, she's found it." I imagined the silence that must have followed. Not the heavy, awkward kind, but the kind that happens when a door shuts for the last time. I hung up, stepped out onto my balcony, and watched the sun sink behind the trees. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of earth and pine sap. Somewhere below, a neighbor's radio played a slow, familiar tune. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about reclaiming space, my space, after years of letting it be filled with people who mistook love for convenience. In the quiet, I thought about the lake that day, the cold shock of the water, the laughter, the way no one reached out a hand. That moment could have been the end of me. Instead, it was the moment I began again. I am Evelyn Margaret Carter. I am no one's liability, no one's burden, and no one's silent benefactor. Being alone is not the same as being abandoned. Sometimes it's the purest form of freedom. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and smiled into the dusk.